Good morning or good afternoon, as it were. Welcome to Research Fundamentals. I am Carolyn Green, and I will be your moderator today. And we are fortunate enough to have a power panel. I don't know, some of you are KL2 scholars and you come to Research Fundamentals all the time. And so I'm not sure if you paid attention to the topic for this. Others of you, I think, joined specifically for this topic, but welcome all of you. I do want to just sorry, I've got a little background noise here I'm trying to get rid of. So today we're talking about turning failures into success, and it's about grit and resilience. And when we were putting this together, we thought the year 2020 has been challenging for a lot of people. 2021 is turning out to be quite challenging also. And I think for the first time, a lot of people felt like they weren't able to achieve what they wanted to. And we thought that this might be a good opportunity to remind us that bouncing back after setbacks and resilience and grit really are fundamental to having a career in research. And it's sort of funny because the business that we're in, we don't get a lot of practice at failing or a lot of training on how to fail. So think about it. If you were a professional athlete, by the time you get to the pros, you've been a college athlete, you've been, a high school athlete, you've been in Little League, and all along the way, you had games that you lost. You had injuries that you bounced back from. Like you'd had all these different instances of not getting exactly what you wanted. And so by the time you're in the pros, you had some training on how to deal with that. Whereas most of us, we did really well in school, in elementary school and high school and college and graduate school. And, everything went our way. And then all of a sudden you're in a research career where you have to be prepared to not get funded on the first try. You have to be prepared for rejection. And for a lot of us, we didn't really get training for that. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to hear from three of our most distinguished and successful researchers about times that they weren't so successful and how they bounced back from that. So I will introduce our panel. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sue Griffen. She is a distinguished faculty scholar and holds the Alexa and William T. Dillard Chair for Geriatric Research. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Neuroinflammation and is recipient of the Outstanding Research Award in Alzheimer's Disease from the Alzheimer's Association in 2016. Dr. Griffen leads a National Institute on Aging Program project grant, now in its 21st year at UAMS. Welcome, Dr. Griffen.
Thank you. Well, when I was thinking about doing this, I felt like I've just been so lucky. Even when I was a graduate student, and I entered graduate school late, although I just finished my bachelor's and master's, but I didn't get to start school because my family was really poor and there was no chance to go to university until my husband decided he was going to go back and do his Ph.D. We were in Los Alamos, and so he was going to do radiation biology and biophysics, and he got a stipend for it at University of Tennessee with Oak Ridge connection, and so since he had a stipend, which was $2,700 a year, then he said, "You want to go to school?" And I'd never gotten a chance before. And I was 28 that year, and I said, sure. And we had two sons, 5 and 6. And so Clay went, that's the younger one, went to kindergarten, and Eddie went to first grade. I went to university, and Ed went to graduate school. And 7 years later, he had his master's and PhD, and I had my bachelor's and master's degree in nutrition. And so then he went to University of Rochester as a graduate fellow, and I was accepted into the school. I hadn't really taken any GRE because I didn't know about that I might be getting to go there because it's a little bit high up, and coming from Tennessee, I thought, well, it's gonna be a good thing if I do. But anyway, when I applied, I hadn't taken my GRE, and there was this thing on it. The essay was about what are your plans? And so remembering what Groucho Marx said about plans, et cetera, he said, my plans are all in embryo, like a small town perched on the edge of nowhere. So I thought, okay, so I wrote in there, my plans are all tangential at the moment. and because everything was going to be brand new. And I got a chance to meet my mentor. At Rochester, they had a little bit swanky. So they had a faculty club. And each year when graduate students came, we had supper there. And everybody introduced themselves. And this redheaded kind of geeky guy came over to me and said, after I told him that I had my Ph.D. in nutrition, he said, my bachelor's and master's in nutrition, he said, you want to work on nutrition and its effects on the brain? And I said, yes. So I had my mentor virtually the first week of graduate school. And sure enough, I could finish. Ed's contract, my husband's contract, was for 4 years. And so I finished. And so I finished my work in 73. And at that time, I was already a mature person, I should say. And so basically during that time, Eddie and Clay, they were both absolutely well and slap dab geniuses. So it was amazing. I was a happy person throughout that whole thing, which made it very nice. So basically what I wanted to tell you about a little adversity, and I haven't had much adversity, honestly. I mean, I haven't. And so I'm just an extremely lucky person, and that is true. And, but once, this was when I was applying for the first time to get a program project. And that's when I had pretty much recently come to Arkansas from Dallas. And every place I went after graduate school, everybody waved me goodbye because I was going to the jumping off place. And the first time was leaving Rochester to go to Dallas. And anything anybody remembered about Dallas was JFK. And then when I was coming to Arkansas, I was like, okay, that's it. You are at the jumping off place. Anyway, I had been asked before that, because I'd already had a lot of RO1s in about 10 years at Southwestern. And so I was asked to be on the review committee for program projects. And when I heard about it, I had just discovered the link between systemic immune disease and the brain. And so, and its innate immune disease, it's an innate immune system. And so I had also just discovered that interleukin-1, which is a powerful cytokine, is actually a driver of the synthesis, the activation of specific enzymes. And one of them was a kinase that actually phosphorylates or causes the phosphorylation of tau. So I was already, plenty in it. And so I thought, I have to have a PO1, I have to have a program project. So I had applied to NIA for that. And when
Dr.
yes.
I hate to interrupt you, but I think you're jumping ahead here, and I want to make sure to introduce the other two speakers, and then no, it's no problem at all. But I think you're about to get to the part where everything turns out to work out really well, and I want to. And so I do want to just give the other speakers a chance to introduce them and let them talk about some of the challenges that they've had also. Okay, so thank you. So next I will introduce Dr. Mark Williams. He is the M. Jocelyn Elders Professor of Health Promotion and Disease Prevention, and he's the Dean of the College of Public Health at UAMS. He's published more than 200 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on behavioral epidemiology, disease prevention, and health promotion. He has been principal investigator, co-principal investigator, or co-investigator on more than 35 funded studies. Welcome, Dr. Williams.
Thank you very much. Now, how much of an introduction from me do you want?
That's what I should have said.
That's okay. You know what, let me just introduce Dr. Larson-Prior first, and then I have a whole list of questions for you. Okay, so Dr. Linda Larson-Prior is professor of psychiatry, neurology, neurobiology, and developmental sciences, pediatrics, and bioinformatics at UAMS. She directs the Neurocognitive Dynamics Laboratory. She's also a faculty member of the Arkansas Children's Nutrition Center, where she directs the Brain Function Laboratory. Her research focuses on the impact of environmental factors such as sleep, physical health, weight status, and mental health on cognitive function across the lifespan. Okay, So the title of our talk is about turning failures into success. So Dr. Williams, I'm going to go back to you. Could you tell us about a time that you initially failed, but were able to turn it into a success?
Yes, and there are obviously, I think, for everybody's career, a number of times when we think we probably could have done better. But this is one where, frankly, I had nothing to do with it. And I think people oftentimes run into these situations. And at first, it looks like, everything is just going to be despair and, possibly the end of your career. But there are ways to go about turning those situations around. And it was when I was just beginning uh, my career after I finished my Ph.D. Most everyone who has ever talked to me knows that I was not trained in public health. I came to public health on the job. And the way that happened was I was teaching at a small liberal arts college in Houston, Texas. And at that time, Houston, being completely opposite of the rest of the country, went into a deep recession because of the oil bust. And the price of oil went down practically to nothing a barrel. And all the big industries in Houston, of which there's only one, it's oil, started laying people off. And the liberal arts college that I was at depended heavily on donations for its annual budget. And they literally were getting no donations. And so they declared a state of exigency, which for those who don't know that term, it's when a university says, we're broke, there's no tenure, there's no anything else anymore, we're going to start laying faculty off. And so I was given a year because I was also a program director. Instead of being immediately terminated, I was given a year. And I thought, well, what is it I really want to do? And so I had to begin thinking about my skills and not what I was trained to do. And so I went over to the School of Public Health at the University of Texas, and I started talking with a few colleagues there about, here's what I can do. Is there a career for me in public health? And more specifically, I had been asked to do a job related to HIV and AIDS. And this was literally when that was becoming the new epidemic. And I was told by an associate professor at that time that certainly HIV and AIDS was not something I wanted to go into as a career because it literally would ruin my career. I would be stigmatized, no one would hire me, and so on and so forth. And obviously I didn't take that advice. And so I think there's the moral of the story, I think from my point of view is there's two morals. First off is when doors close, think about your skills. You can do more than one thing, and you can certainly do more than you were trained to do. And then secondly, don't always listen to people that should know and are giving you advice. Do what you believe you should be doing, and if it's right, you'll know it, and usually very quickly. So.
Thank you. I think we will listen to that advice though, because it's very good advice. And I will now go back to Linda because Dr. Larson-Prior is actually one of my heroes. I don't know if you noticed in the introduction, she has faculty appointments in more departments than I think I've ever heard of. She has a very diverse skill set. So why don't I turn it to you? How did you end up having, how did you end up in a position where you're so well qualified in so many different areas? And I'm suspecting that the story may have to do with bouncing back after some setbacks.
Actually numerous setbacks, but I'm going to choose the one that probably was the most difficult for me. And it's not dissimilar from Mark's. So about my up and out year in my first faculty position, the department my husband was in fell apart completely, and he had to find a new job, which he did. We were in Pennsylvania at the time, and he found a new job in California. So we had to move. And that meant I had to find a job in a job market that was essentially closed. So I did find such a job. I found a job in a startup medical school, which, by the way, has had some real advantages, and a wonderful department chair. And they were very excited to have a research scientist. So I moved myself and my grant to California, and I set up my laboratory. Unfortunately, the building inspector walked in and said that the laboratory couldn't be used because the space was inappropriate. The door wouldn't open the required amount that it was supposed to when people walked in and out of the lab. And so my research just went completely down the drain. I had to turn my grant back in. And there was no place to put the laboratory. I couldn't use the laboratory I had. My job was to develop their neurobiology program for medical students, which was a pretty full-time job. And now I was faced with trying to figure out, as Mark was, what I was going to do with no research career in front of me when I was a research scientist. So I started looking all around, and the options were not great. I also said, what's my skill set? And I looked outside of academia, and I did not get a very positive response to that. I had a lot of friends who were very negative. I was expecting support and got told that I didn't have any skills and I should just give up. So I looked around, and ultimately I found a research scientist named Don Jewett. And probably none of you have ever heard of this man, but the brainstem auditory evoked response was essentially discovered by him. So he was the guy. They were called Jewett bumps for a very long time. So he was an expert electrophysiologist. I was trained as an in vitro electrophysiologist. I did patch clamp single unit recording in cerebellum, and I now shifted my career direction to auditory physiology and EEG. And in Don's group, which was not actually at UCSF. He had retired from UCSF and was running his own business called Abratech, and it was funded by SBIRs. So we wrote SBIR grants, and we did auditory physiology. And at one point, a grant came up that DJ decided we would go for on sleep, and that brought me into sleep neurobiology. So Abratech paid for me and one of the techs there to take the Stanford sleep medicine course, which we did. Then we ran sleep studies, and both Johanna, who was the tech at the time, and myself became sleep neuroscientists. And so I went from having no career at all in a completely different direction. And that actually turned out to be what was necessary to get me my next job, which was at WashU, when they wanted a human electrophysiologist to complement their neuroimaging program. And that moved me into fMRI and neuroimaging at one of the top universities in the country for that. So it was a turnaround that was positive in the end, but extremely difficult to work through.
Thank you. That's a great story. And what it sounds like is not just that there is some serendipity in terms of, the context changing, but also you were able to really employ some flexibility in, similar to how Dr. Williams was saying, like looking at your skill set, looking at what you can do, even if it's different than how you started out, really leveraging the experiences that you've had and maybe taking them in a different direction. So thank you. I'm going to go back to Dr. Griffen. And, Sue, I feel like we are all really honored to have you here and just really lucky to hear your voice, because you broke through ground in all sorts of ways, looking at inflammation in the Alzheimer's process. And I suspect that when you first started talking about inflammation, it probably took some convincing to get people to understand what you were talking about, or to break that kind of ground. I have to imagine that it wasn't easy to really be the first one to make such a claim. So could you tell us a little bit about what kind of pushback or what kind of challenges you faced when you were trying to establish this new line of research?
Well, I tell you what, I certainly didn't face the kind of worrisome things like the previous two, like Linda and Dr. Williams had. But and I think that's what I mean about being lucky. Well, when I first talked about it, it also involved neuroinflammation that's in the brain. It involves the glia. And the glia, that's the name, it means glue. That is what hold the neurons in place, according to those Germans. And so glia weren't so much interest as they are now, because they really are so important, as everybody recognizes now. So when I first talked about this idea and the role of the glia, and what I said was that because of our findings, that when neurons are insulted, then they signal to glia, named mostly microglia, and the microglia begin making IL-1, and that puts the brain, because of its unique immunity, that puts the brain into a situation where they are in a self-perpetuating cycle. And that's why there's the advance of Alzheimer's disease over a long period of time. And so when I said that sort of things, it was like, okay, I can't stand to hear it by people that were listening, because it involved glia, et cetera. And so then I made a generalized statement that meant that any neurodegenerative disease that's characterized by both glial activation and aggregates would be in this cycle. And that's what over these many years we've shown to be the case. And so, but that I think, and this is what each of the other two people have talked about, it makes you unique. And when you're unique, you have to face up to it, because it means that some people will just hate your guts. But mostly, if you can just maintain love for them, then you can be all right. And so I did apply, and I did by some reviewers, and I was going to tell about this time when basically the site visitors came. This was when I was over Children's, by the way. This was in '94. The site visitors came for our to tell them what we were going to apply for, et cetera, and show them everything we had done, which was plenty. They were so impressed with us. And when they left, the program officer told me, Sue, that went so well. And so we figured that we were really in, but it went back to the big group of reviewers, which I really sat on that group at the time. But anyway, their response was, I don't believe it. And so we were turned down. Well, I have to say, infuriated by that and insulted. And so I wrote back a 9-page letter to comment on every one of their comments. And so then I got a phone call from the guy at the top and said, please write again and get it back to me in a couple of months. And then at the next meeting, we'll have a site visit again, and then we'll review this. So we did, and I got it. So, but that's nothing compared to, the university not allowing you to have your lab or being out of a job or something. But basically, we have been able to maintain. I've put up with stuff like the first PO1 we did, it was a group of 5 of us from all different universities. And we got together and wrote a program project grant, which they gently told me that, we're afraid that the University of Arkansas, this was in '92, the University of Arkansas will not be able to handle this money and the subcontracts that would have to be written. So it was given to NYU. But you know what? I don't care. Money doesn't care who owns it, and I wanted it. And so we doing it in '92 from NYU, then that put us on the springboard to do what we've done since then. And so 21 years, and we've done a lot of really fun stuff. And if I had time, I'd tell you all about our new APOE4 data, which is outstanding.
Thank you, Dr. Griffen. And we will have to have you back to talk about the science at some point, because I think there's a lot we can learn from all of that. Actually, Dr. Larson-Prior, I have a question for you. And one of the things that we keep hearing is that everyone seems to have so much drive to keep going. And I got actually a suggested question that is similar to what I was planning to ask from Dr. Nolan. The idea of internal compass, right? Or like just that internal drive to just keep going. And I have to imagine that at times it's hard to maintain that level of drive. And we see so much burnout and so much in academia, so many people that are just walking away and unable to keep pushing themselves forward. I'm wondering, what do you think we can do to cultivate with that kind of resilience? How do you keep your fire burning?
So I'm gonna say something about that may sound a little off topic, but bear with me. I have two jobs. I have two careers. I've been in fitness training for as long as I've been in academia, actually longer, because I worked as a trainer all the way through graduate school. It was part of the way I funded myself. I've always known that when I retired from science, I could move into fitness. I'm certified, I've got lots of experience, blah, blah, blah. I could always do it. So every time I had one of these, and I had more than one of these events that I had to rethink, how much do I want to do research? I can always change my direction and go into fitness. And I just never did it. It was never real. I love fitness. I love doing it. I love teaching it. I love training people, but I never wanted to give up research. And that's all I can say. I just never wanted to give it up. I had lots of opportunities where it would have been easy. It would have been easy to just walk away. It was hard to stay. It was hard to fight, but I didn't want to. So I think that's just where it has to be. It has to be inside you. That's what you have to want to do. You have to enjoy this. This has to be something so pleasurable to you, so much what you want to do, that you just give it an opportunity where it's easier to say, I can give this up and not feel like a failure. I can feel like I succeeded in another field, and you just don't want to do it.
Okay, so yesterday was opening day for baseball, and that sounds like love of the game, you know?
I don't know if you can cultivate that. I think it has to be something inside you. You have to want to do this. And if you don't, and the opportunity pushes you over the edge, well, find something you like better. I mean, that's fine. And another thing I'll say, because one of the things I've been through has really taught me, we define failure. We have to define failure for ourselves. We can't let other people tell us that we failed because we didn't live up to their expectations. It's our own expectations we have to live up to. If leaving science is a decision, then it's not a failure. It's just a decision.
Dr. Williams, you're also a person who had lots of choices. You could have stepped away at many different times. And you mentioned, that you really followed what your skill set was and what you were interested in. I want to dig a little deeper into that. Like, what's the process of finding that path, and how do you find mentors? Like, how do you, once you start knowing the kinds of things you're interested in, like, but what's the process of really figuring out how to move forward with that?
Those are very good questions, and I think they're rather difficult to answer. So I'll do the best I can. I would have to say that figuring out what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be was really a trial and error situation. And in a way, I felt like it was about some books I'd read about dating. It takes 75 no's and 1 yes. And the 1 yes probably isn't coming until after you have 75 no's. And I did talk to a lot of people. It just turned out that public health was the area that interested me. And then I think the second thing that helped me a lot was being shameless when it came to asking people that I thought I had something to learn from to help me learn. I think one of the biggest detriments to any career is the lack of humility. And I would say the folks that I have seen that have not done so well are those people that sort of assume that they know everything. And I think it's better to approach a career from the perspective of nothing, and to be willing to listen to people that do know more than you do. I mean, that's sort of contradictory to the first thing I said about I didn't take the advice on going into a particular area. But that was something as well that I didn't feel that person knew that much about. So for me, he was not a good mentor. We were good colleagues later on, but he was not a good mentor. And I would say there's two things: recognizing who you can work with, and then literally working with them. It's not something where you let them decide when you need to be mentored. You decide when you need to be mentored, what you need more information about. And then I would say the other thing is, don't be afraid to go down some possible rabbit holes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I've always been of the firm belief that the more you know, the more you know. It may be of absolutely zero use, but you still know it. And I'll give you an example. One year I got incredibly interested in roses. I don't know why or how or anything else. So I read books and books and books about how to grow roses, you know, why the first rose I stuck in the ground immediately died, you know, those types of things. Turned out later on that one of my mentors, and I've had mentors throughout my entire career, I still have mentors. The way we hooked up was because they were an avid gardener, they knew about roses, and I could talk to them. And so you never know what is useful information and what isn't useful information. If you're interested, do it. Get educated in that area, because what translates is the skills. What I learned was terribly important was learning how to learn. It's not just what you know, it's how you know it. And so, to be quite honest, I probably at that time knew more about roses than I knew about my, you know, the topic in my career. but just figuring out how to go about learning about that, which was nothing but fun for me, I could bring over into my career and turn learning about virology, for example, which I knew nothing about, make it fun. And realize that, you know, you don't have to know everything when you start off. You don't have to know what an allele is. You don't have to know what this is, and you don't have to know what that is, because all of that you can learn, and not to be afraid of it.
It's great words of wisdom. I think I'm going to do like one of those needle points and put 75 no's and 1 yes, because that's a great ratio to think about, especially after a year that so many people have had of really facing a lot of challenges. That's just a great reframe. And you know, the idea of learning how to learn and not you know, not being ashamed of not knowing and asking questions. I think those are all really transferable. You know, one thing that, and I'm going to open this up to any of the speakers. One thing that keeps coming through though is that trade-off between, you know, listening to people, asking for mentorship, asking for people to give you guidance, and then also not ignoring what people say and charting your own path. And I want to sort of give a specific scenario that I think a lot of our younger scholars face, where they may feel discouraged or destabilized even by someone that's in a mentorship role. That basically the person who's supposed to know more is telling them that their idea is bad, that their direction they're going in isn't, you know, is off track. How do you decide? How do you know when you're supposed to take that advice versus, you know, just, you know, taking their advice, maybe go in a different direction versus be, you know, persevere and persistent and stick with your original idea? Like, how do you weigh that out?
Well, you know, one of the things that I'd written down before we started today was, if you're right, you have to be brave. And that doesn't mean confrontational, but if you know what you have done and you've seen, you know, you have an idea and you say, okay, I'm going to see whether or not it applies. And then you do, and you see that it does apply, and you figured out something, then you have to stand up for it. I mean, you can't just wilt. And so I think that bravery, and some people feel or express anyway, that then you're sort of a person that leans on people and, you know, makes them do what you want them to do. And in a way, it's true. But it's like when you're asked to review grants, and when you have an R1 or maybe your second one, then you're liable to be asked to be a reviewer be on a panel. And when you do, you have to remember that when you're writing a critique, that's not criticism. That doesn't mean you should criticize them. In fact, your role as in that capacity is to guide them to a better place, because what we're all about is wanting everybody's science to be better. And, so thinking about those sorts of things, those are career moves that you'll go through as you go along in research and getting grants. And basically, you do have to have the money to do research. And so then you have to be bold enough to ask and bold enough to say if somebody steps on your face.
If you're right, you have to be brave. Thank you, Dr. Griffen. That's wonderful. And you mentioned something about the money. Okay, and I'm going to turn this to Dr. Larson-Prior. You have to have money to do research. Tell us about funding. I think that a lot of times people, our junior scholars, they only know about the kinds of grants that maybe they've worked on with their mentors. You've been really creative in funding labs and getting all sorts of things off the ground. So what words of wisdom do you have for our group about how to keep the money flowing so that you can chart your own course?
Well, I hope there are administrators listening. So the first answer to that question is money is green. And it doesn't matter much where the money came from. It's green and it spends, and you need it. So as many different sources as you can find that are relevant to the work that you do, that's the number of sources you need to go after. The other advice that I would give is something that I wish I had had someone advise me of long ago. And if they did advise me, I wish I'd listened better. But either way, write for every cycle. And I mean, every cycle. You just have to write for every cycle. You have to have a grant in the hopper every single cycle, because 1 in 5, 1 in 10 is going to fund. Put in as many different mechanisms as you can find. Another thing, so Mark was talking about being a lifelong learner. I think that's one of the reasons we're all in science, is because we are lifelong learners. But we need to think of broadening our learning outside of our little tiny holes. We need to make that, Mark went to roses. I do fitness. Right now I'm into writing. So I've got my library is growing on writing and writing skills. It came up at a Mentoring Matters program that I was on a panel on, and it resonated with everybody. And one of the things that came out of that really is we write for a living. We write for a living. So everything we read, everything we write down is part of our thought process. And we should take advantage of that. If there's more in your head, more interesting things that you could write grants about, then you probably think right at this moment. You aren't as constrained as you think. And I think, new ideas and new ways of thinking about things don't happen if you don't take a chance. But if you take a chance, you have to recognize you could fail. And then what do we do with failure? We learn from it.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to dig deeper. Okay. How do you learn from failure? How do you dust yourself off? Like, I think everyone sort of has everyone who's successful has personal tricks of that process. I'm going to ask you personally, Dr. Larson-Prior, when you fail, how do you get past the narcissistic injury? How do you get past the hurt feelings, the sense of disappointment, oh, that was a waste of time? Like, all those negative feelings are pretty normal. What do you do to get past them?
Well, my first strategy was one that I learned as a graduate student and then passed to my own students. And that is, like, when you get that rejection letter or you get those reviews you read them over, you call all of the people who read it, all the names you want, because you'll want to do that. Then you put it in a drawer and you come back to it a week later and you'll discover that everybody on that panel got smarter. At that point, you can now look more carefully at what it was they had to say to you, because as Sue just said, the point of a review is not to make you feel bad, it's to help you do a better job. So every paper I've ever had really, really strong criticisms of has been far, far better for the revisions I made as a result of that. Every grant that I've received, no matter how stupid I think the review was, has made a better grant, a better proposal the next time I submitted it. I've seen junior investigators whose response to being triaged, or whose response to getting an unfundable score is to say, well, this isn't a good idea. Baloney. Revise it, put it back in. If it's a good idea when you started with it, it's a good idea at the end. And then the other one is, if you have a failure and it's a real failure, this was my idea, this was my hypothesis, I ran some pilot data and my data does not support my idea. okay, good, you learned something. Now you have to rethink your idea. And I think the other thing that's worthwhile is to find people you can talk to. I mean, those of us as senior people, we're now in the position where we have students who, whether they want to hear us or not, we can talk to them. And don't think for a moment, all of you early stage investigators or students or anybody else out there, that your senior people don't learn from you. We learn from you a lot. We take advantage of your minds and your experiences and your new ways of thinking about things, and we incorporate it and learn from you just as much as hopefully you learn from us. So I think that's another way. There's real joy for me in talking with my colleagues and my students, and that's really joyful for me. And so that's part of what I do.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit and I want to go back to something that Dr. Williams had said in passing earlier, but I think it ties to some of the questions that I'm getting, and it's the idea of, you mentioned that you felt like that you might have been stigmatized, based on some of the specifics of that situation. And I know that also you were studying at one point HIV, which is a highly stigmatized disorder. I think a lot of the work that you've done, a lot of groundbreaking work in disease prevention and health promotion is with populations that maybe are stigmatized and underserved. You have to kind of be a warrior to do that kind of work. And, especially now, I think we have some people who are interested in maybe doing more health equity work, doing studying topics that maybe aren't so popular and there's not as much money for them right now. So I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about, how you managed that, how you navigated it, and, both the personal feeling of being stigmatized, but then also how do you get around that to still be able to make it lucrative?
I guess I was, lucky in that, to begin with, HIV/AIDS research did not stay stigmatized that long. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years after I began doing research in the area. It was like all of a sudden everybody wanted to do research in that area because that's where the funding at that time had gone. So I can't answer that very well. However, the people that I tended to work with in terms of research, there were a lot of ideas that came out of that, which the mainstream has not accepted and has never accepted. But they are ideas that are still worthwhile and still worth pursuing in some ways. And I think it's a realization at some point, and I've had this happen with grant applications as well, ideas can be untimely, but that doesn't mean they're worthless. And so you simply put them on the back burner, you might say, or you work them into other things. And so I think equity and access to healthcare, people that were working in my discipline were there long before others were. And this came up very strongly when we were doing research on medication adherence for drug users. Everybody who was a clinician said drug users cannot adhere to medication schedules. And you would ask people, well, how do you know? And I mean, really, it's not what do you think, it's how do you know? Nobody knew because nobody had actually studied it. And so looking for those kinds of areas also present questions. So again, I think sometimes it's learning how to learn. It's not necessarily taking what people tell you or what you read at face value, but looking for questions that are part of that. And I think for whatever value this has, you kind of forget about what other people think about you. I mean, people are going to think what they think. And, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. So, I mean, if it's not illegal and it's not and it's not unethical, then so be it.
You have to be brave. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Griffen, I'm going to throw a question at you because one of the things that you started off with talking about was, how your career was, sort of was affected by that of your husband, I think it was at the time. And I did want to just bring up the idea that, we're all trying to have careers and personal lives and families and all sorts of different relationships. And I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit about, especially as a woman, how do you balance it? The demands and the expectations of being in sync with the needs of your family versus, the things that you may want to pursue for yourself.
Well, for one thing, I have the incredible energy. And virtually I'm never sick. And I passed that on to my children. They were never sick, and my husband wasn't sick either. So that was a big deal, because if you have children or a spouse who's sick, and has a lot of problems, that makes it all different. So I was, as you were saying, Dr. Wibbs, lucky in all those ways. I wanted to talk about HIV for just a second, because my background was a little bit about immunology, because I've been studying graft versus host disease. So when they didn't love my idea, these creepy people in Alzheimer's disease that are all about amyloid, then I thought, okay, now they're giving money for HIV. So I'll just get an HIV grant, and then I'll do a little bit on HIV and a whole bunch on AD, and then I'll come back in. And so that's exactly what I did. But meanwhile, I got on, and this is an important lesson to learn. I got on, they asked me to be on the neuro AIDS study section, which was all the stuff in the brain about HIV, came through that. And it was a group of virologists. And I'm sure this is not the case with all virologists, but they were the meanest, most critical people I ever sat at a table with. And so after the second year, I thought, this is crazy. I'm not supposed to be here. Because I would always have to be the person who was saying, well, but there was this. And you should not stay associated or be intimately related to people that are not wonderful. Because the world is full of all these wonderful people, and you don't have to. So quit things that you don't want to be doing, because it will take your time, and also it will sap your energy. So that's what I wanted to say about that. But as a woman, it is different as a woman. It's a different, if you just want to go to the store, it's different. You want to walk in the dark, it's different, because we are women. And so naturally, you have to be strong enough to say what you have to say in any conversation. And it has to be done. Love is so important in science. And I don't have to divide myself, because I can make coleslaw and at the same time be thinking about science, which I do all the time. And I was lucky my husband was in science. And so, we had plenty to discuss. But also, I had the best time. I always have had the best time. And I don't know whether people looking in think that, but I was always extremely happy. I really loved and was crazy about my husband. So I was tolerant, I think, looking back, of a whole bunch of stuff. So, he doesn't pick up his socks. So what? I do. I got plenty of room for it. So basically, one of the things I think you have to do is you have to be prepared or something. If you don't have that gift of loving what you do, and I know that the other two people have commented on this, then don't do it. And if you can't think about it, virtually your whole time, there's this little thing playing in the background about what did that mean? What did that gel mean yesterday? It meant something really fantastic, by the way. But anyway, we were looking at it together. And if you can feel that way, and you can go on thinking about it while you're doing whatever you're doing. I mean, a lot of these things that we do are just, and we lived under all kinds of poorness. We lived in a house that had 20 watts of power for the whole little, probably 500 square feet. But it did have a flush toilet, which was better off than I had been when I was growing up. So basically, through thick or thin, do what you love, and it will never fail you. It's okay to be a woman too, by the way. And I was at the table as a woman, as the only woman, plenty of times, or the one of two, that would be more like. Anyway, that's nothing. Being at the table is what's important. And also you have to be willing to say what you think, and you have to be willing, even as a little, beginner, you have to be willing to state what you mean. For example, if someone is out of line with being too critical, too mean, or whatever, then you have to think of the way that you're going to get them. And then they're going to still love you, and you're still going to love them. But don't let people get away with things that you are not willing to tolerate. And that in all kinds of personal realms, I think that's really important, but especially in science, and especially if you're a woman. And also, it's not bad to talk to other women. Some women they pit themselves against men, which is wrong, because we're completely different. And if you don't believe it, call me and I'll tell you about the corpus callosum in women. That's the big bridge between the two brains that you have in women versus men. But anyway, I'm just telling you that at any time that you can get money and it's not heinous or something, or cheating, never cheat. Never cheat. It's not worth it. So if you can get the money and you haven't cheated and you have the idea, then go for it. Because as was said before, you have to have it.
Oh, that's great, Dr. Griffen. Okay, so we've had a lot of similar themes through from our three panels, but I want to just capture one of them was about money. If it's not illegal, if it's not unethical, go for it. Write for every cycle. Go after every possible funding source. Be shameless about asking for money. Okay. I also heard surround yourself with love. Love what you do. Love the people you work with. Have love in your life. Have a passion for it. Be humble and be willing to learn. Panelists, did I miss any other of the big takeaways? Anything else you want to share before we wrap this up?
I wanted to ask Linda if she still does personal training. Dr. Wade told me the day before yesterday, you have to get a trainer.
Well, so it's really amazing, but I left St. Louis and I've been here 5 years, and because of what I teach gyrotonic and Pilates, and that isn't very popular here in Arkansas. So I haven't, but if I could, I would. Let's see, I see Brittany Ayers here, and I'm getting my yoga teacher training certificate, Brittany.
And Dr. Williams, it was really nice to meet you, by the way. And maybe you have a little interaction with one of the students I mentored, John Musser, who is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's great to meet you both as well, and everyone else that I can see. And I see one of my own faculty here. So
it was really fun listening to everybody's perspectives. It really was.
Well, I am so grateful for all the words of wisdom, the encouragement, the advice, and just this has been a real privilege to have you be so generous with your time and vulnerable and open about the curves that you've hit in the road and whatnot. So on behalf of the KL2 program, thank you again for coming. And for our audience, we know how to track these guys down. So if you have more questions, I am happy to forward them. I got a lot of them in the chat box and wasn't able to hit them all, but hopefully we got the main points covered. And I want to thank you all. Thank you, Maisha. Make sure to log your attendance and have a good rest of the day.
Can I just say one more thing?
Of course.
You should be, one of the things I forgot to mention, you have to be generous with yourself. I was telling you an example of, my husband didn't pick up after himself, but I had energy, so I just picked up. Don't carry it with you. Give away everything.
amen. I would agree with that.
Leave your socks.
Bye.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And definitely, you know how to reach us if you have more questions or follow up. And we'll talk to you next month. Bye.